Recently, I've been wondering if the flip side of fear is curiosity. And if you just change the perspective from, I don't know this and it's scary, it must be terrible, to, I don't know this, I don't know anything about this. What do I need to do to learn a little bit about it?
Hello and welcome to Art Restart, where we learn from artists who, wherever they work, whatever they make, are shaking up the status quo in their fields and in their communities. I'm Pier Carlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, which is brought to you by the Thomas S. Kenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with violinist Johnny Gandelsman. Now, music aficionados the world over know Johnny Gandelsman as being one of our finest violinists, as comfortable playing contemporary works as he is interpreting pieces from the Western classical canon. Equally important, though, is the fact that he's also an inveterate musical innovator. A longtime member of Silkroad Ensemble and a co-founder of string quartet Brooklyn Rider, which celebrated its 20th anniversary this past year, Johnny has long championed the dissolution of genre boundaries to celebrate music's unique power to bridge cultural divides. Over the years, he's collaborated with and played the works of musicians from the Middle East Appalachia, and along the way, he has stretched his own skills to adapt his instrument to a host of musical traditions. Johnny's also been a driving force in the commissioning of new works for the concert stage, founding his own label, Inner Circle Records, to produce and release new compositions. In the doldrums of the COVID lockdown, when musicians saw a year's worth of scheduled work vanish, he hatched a plan. He set out to find dozens of art institutions and music presenters to partner with him to commission 22 composers from all over the country to create new works for the solo violin. 4 years later, the project has now resulted in an album titled This Is America, an anthology 2020 to 2021. A 3-CD set with a 40-page booklet produced by Inner Circle Records. Let's listen to a selection from the album. Here's Johnny playing Strewn by composer Christina Corton. Since the album's release, Johnny himself has been playing sections of the album all over the country in marathon performances at many of the institutions who partnered with him on the project. Johnny spoke to me from Santa Fe, where he was preparing to play, in 2 concerts on 2 consecutive nights, the 6 Bach cello suites that he himself transposed to solo violin. And just so you know, he did record these suites for an album, which means you too can listen to them. I started our talk by asking him how, as a young musician, he cultivated his desire for discovery and experimentation at the same time as he was honing his technique.
Well, it's a good question. I think to some, you can do either or. You can either focus on being as good as possible on the violin, or you can kind of be curious and try a bunch of things and see where that leads. When I was in school, I wouldn't say that I was encouraged to experiment. The environment was, a pretty conservative environment. It was like, this is what classical music is, and this is how you do it, and this is how you do it at the very high level. And anything else was maybe frivolous to some degree. I think it wasn't until there were a few things that happened. One was that during my time at school, my friends at school started a chamber orchestra, kind of a do-it-yourself chamber orchestra called Wild Ginger Philharmonic. And that was my first experience of like true experimentation and joyous music making in community. And in general, like what was a music community? That's Wild Ginger kind of introduced me to that.
You had not felt that just in with being at school among musicians?
Yeah, I mean, and like a lot of playing the violin is, and trying to get as good on it as you can is you spend a lot of time on your own in your practice room or at home, and you're practicing many hours a day, and you're probably practicing works that put the violin at the forefront of like the role, the solo role. And this playing in the chamber orchestra really opened my mind and my ears and my heart to what it was like to make music with others. It was a life-changing moment, really. And like from the time that I started playing in Wild Ginger, the path that I was on was kind of like exploded. And it took, to the maybe dismay of my teachers and my parents, who had different ideas of what I would be doing. It took a while.
Because their idea was you would be a principal violinist in a major orchestra? Was that the idea?
No, it was more like they wanted me to be a concertizing soloist.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, you don't really set your goals anywhere but at the very top. And then, just so there's a lot of built-in disappointment there. But
so then with Wild Ginger, how did that outlook change?
Well, first of all, I realized that there is so much to music that I did not know or did not consider. I learned how to interpret a score. I also learned that I had the freedom to interpret the score and not just follow what has been done by my either peers or the generation before. And then the idea of community and doing things in community and learning from people, and how much more joyous that process was than the one I was familiar with before, which was to be just, practicing on your own. Another thing that Wild Ginger did was to really work on, and I don't even know if it was how intentional it was. It was just things that we wanted to do, but we kind of broke down the barriers between performers and audiences. We talked to the audiences between pieces. We would walk out into the audience and play music by memory. Sometimes we would, in an intermission of a concert, teach the audience an aria and then play it with everybody together. The thing about Wild Ginger was that the guy who started it, David Goodman, there were two originally, Jason Gamer and David Goodman. David is the one who kind of took it further a little bit, but Dave did everything. He got the players, he picked the repertoire, he booked the concert halls, he booked a place for us to go away to for a week and rehearse. He got insurance, he found a chef that would make meals for the people who were there. He booked the buses.
Was he also a student while he was doing this?
He was a percussion major.
Good Lord.
At my school. And then also advertising, right? Like you do what you can to bring people to the concerts.
Yeah.
And when you get to the venue, you set up all the chairs, you set up all the stands, you make sure that people have food to eat. So it basically showed me that if you really want to do something and you believe in it, then you do everything that needs to be done to make it work. And that was just such a different world than the one that I knew before.
And tell me about how you discovered and cultivated your passion for contemporary music.
So in 2002, I was invited to sub for my friend Colin Jacobson, who at the time was in his second or third year as a member of Silkroad Ensemble, which is an organization that was started by Yo-Yo Ma in the year 2000. And the idea was to bring musicians from along the ancient trading route and basically, see what happens. In fact, the very first album of the group was called When Strangers Meet. And I think that's actually a very apt name for how it started in the beginning. And so this group of musicians included some of the world's greatest tradition bearers from different parts of the world. And they were all coming together, sharing their traditions, and then participating in other traditions as well. And that was another life-changing experience. I played in the group for about 18 years. I can't really quantify like how much I've learned while being a member of the group, musically speaking. Also, the community aspect was so strong. Like the people came together as strangers, but in the end, it was like we had a very strong band vibe. And that was incredible. And we went all over the world. We played in different venues, different situations. And I'm not sure if it's known about the group, but the organization actually commissioned a ton of new music, commissioned and premiered a lot of new music. That was a big part of like the mission of the group. And through that process, I had a chance to work with, living composers who are also performers. And I love that process. It's like figuring out how to learn and interpret a score that was finished a few days ago. Is really exciting. It's like being in a lab, and just kind of turning things this way and that way and seeing, is this, this the right way? Is this the right way? And then you have the composer that you can talk to and draw from for,
the composer's not dead 100 years ago. That's a big difference.
That's a big difference. Yeah. Another thing that you quickly realize is that when you work with composers who are alive, who are bringing you their music, is that, regardless of how much information they put into the score about what they're going for, there's no way to notate exactly what they mean, their thoughts exactly, or their feelings exactly. The visual notation falls short of being able to capture exactly what the composer wants. And I think the composer is looking for the performers to bridge that gap, right? To try and figure out what the composer means, and then also bring their own mind and soul and interpretation to the piece. And when you look at a score like that, it's very different than looking at a score, say from Beethoven, and thinking, well, he wrote everything he meant, and this is how it goes. And it's fixed. It's almost like a museum piece, like a rigid kind of set of instructions. And so by not doing that, by looking at a score as a living, breathing element, it has changed how I also approach music by composers who are no longer alive.
Since we're talking about commissioning, we've got to talk about This Is America, because you commissioned, my last count, I think it's 28 artists over 4
That's
years.
right.
Is that right?
That's right.
So you title the compendium This Is America, which of course makes people like me ask you, what do you think it says about America? I'm not going to go that route, because I think you can just listen to the album and make up your own mind about what it says about America. What I'd rather ask you is about what's been your biggest surprise from this project, and how has it differed maybe from what you thought it might be when you gave out the first commission in 2020?
Sure. Well, I could just say that when I started, I really didn't know what it was going to end up being. I started by reaching out to presenters around the country and saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, would you support a $5,000 commission for a composer to write a new work?
And this was during the pandemic, right?
This was I started, my first emails went out in the summer of 2020.
Okay.
I think it was a particularly strange time for our field, for the performing arts field, because all the live shows were canceled. People were trying to stay connected. Performing arts organizations were trying to stay connected to their audiences through creating digital content. I think it was actually a moment of opportunity, there was money in the budget because things were canceled. There was some money in the budget to try something different.
In whose budget?
In the performing arts organization's budgets.
I see.
And then there was the year itself, right? Was the pandemic and killing of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter movement and the fires in California and the election that was happening. I think a lot of people in our field were trying to figure out what is their responsibility, what can they do to address the things that were happening. And so I started by, asking about 2 or 3 composers, and then I got some presenters on board, and then I just kept pushing the envelope as much as I could, and I ended up with 22 works commissioned. I didn't know really anything about what it was going to be.
And like. How many presenters, how many institutions did you have to work with for those initial 22 commissions?
How many came on board, or how many I got in touch with? That's very different.
How many came on board? Actually, what the ratio was, actually.
The ratio was probably somewhere in the 1 and 5.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think I had 20 presenting organizations and a couple.
So you made about 100 asks.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there were a couple of individual donors that supported the project as well. But I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just pushing the envelope and asking, okay, we got these people on board. I have another composer on the list. I wonder if I can find a presenter to commission them. And just kept pushing it, and ended up with 22, and now it's 28. And once I gathered the scores and the pieces is when I realized that the form that it could take.
Were there any requirements? Were there any criteria or restrictions in the commissioning?
I asked 2 things from the composers. I suggested the length of the piece, and then which was somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. And then I just asked them to think about the time that we were experiencing. And some people wrote 5-minute pieces, and some people chose to write 25-minute pieces. And I think that kind of speaks to, in the case of people who wrote longer pieces, I think it speaks to, generosity on their part, because their fee was the same, whether it was 5 minutes or 25 minutes, but also that they had a lot to say at the time. Yeah, so I was thinking about the album and how, recording it and then sequencing it, because when you sequence something, you inadvertently giving preference to something by opening the album with it or closing the album with it, or side B starts with something really important. Well, in this case, I really didn't want to do that, and honestly, was whatever it is, I think it's 24 pieces on the album, there were the possibilities for sequence were way too many to consider. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to sequence it in the alphabetical order of the composer, of their last name. And it was really funny how excellent that fit into the overall shape of the album. It's an almost 4 hours long album with 3 CDs, and somehow it just worked out. But then when I was, when that happened, I was thinking, well, this feels like a music anthology, specifically an anthology of that time, 2020, 2021, which is when people were writing it. So that's where we ended up. It was not premeditated in any way.
And so what it's such a vague question, but what have you learned, whether artistically or thematically, from this compendium of new music?
Well, one thing is that there's just an incredible abundance of creativity in this country.
Because you also work with several composers who were new collaborators for you, right?
Yeah, I commissioned some of the composers I commissioned were old friends, but many of them were new people I haven't met before. So first time working with them. And you know, you might think, if you're kind of in the world of classical music, if you follow it closely, you may think that the world of contemporary classical music is not very big, based on, you know, programming choices of big organizations, based on the names that get played a lot, and then nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's, I guess, what that was my that was one takeaway, is just there's so much creativity out there, and so all you have to do is ask or listen, and it's right there. I mean, I knew it before, but this really showed it to me very clearly, which kind of inspires me to continue this type of work going forward. Another takeaway is that, and this is like a very personal thing, but I realized that I'm not immune to the very human emotion of fear, and in particular fear of the unknown. You know, I think it relates very much to, you know, our current state of the world in general, but there's so much fear mongering out there, and it's the fear of the other. It's the fear of a stranger who will, you know, come and take your job, or you know, kill you or rob you or whatever, and change your culture, dilute your culture. I mean, there's so many ways that people talk about it, and it's easy. I think it's easy to fall into that very obvious trap. I thought that before this project, but then I encountered some of the pieces and that came back to me that were really challenging to me to understand, or were foreign in terms of what was being asked of me. And my first reaction was rejection of it. Like, I rejected the music, I judged it. And when I realized that, that kind of terrified me, that I was doing that, because I didn't think that I was that person. But that's what happened. And I was very lucky that the composers, when I
were you able to tell them that you were fearful?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't expressing my judgment of the work, but I was expressing like that I was incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't know how I can do this. You know, I don't know how to interpret it, or I don't know how to execute it technically. But it was great because the composers very kindly showed me the way in very different, you know, different pieces needed different things. And through that, I learned that, you know, the fear of, I don't know, of falling short of excellence, or fear of being misunderstood, or fear of falling on your face flat and everybody laughing, like all those things, they're very real. But in the case of this project, all I had to do was to ask some questions, and then a path forward would present itself. And so I realized that this thing of fear, like, to me, recently I've been wondering if the flip side of fear is curiosity. And if you just change the perspective from, I don't know this and it's scary, it must be terrible, to, I don't know this, I don't know anything about this, what do I need to do to learn a little bit about it? You know, what are the things that make it work? Why is the composer really interested in it? What are they trying to go for? And then find a way for me to relate to that. Then there's a path forward. But, you know, the thing is, now it's been about 4 years that I've been spending time with these works, and I feel very parental about them. Like I love them like my little kids, you know. I want to take care of them. And part of that is, you know, playing them and playing them again and learning more about them, and then sharing them with audiences. And I'm hoping that other violinists will want to play these works, and other musicians will want to commission these composers. of the presenting organizations will choose to present the music by these composers on their programs. In the ideal world, there's a variety of ripples that are going out into the world from this type of work.
You've worked with 28 composers starting during probably the most vulnerable time in their career, the pandemic. And you also work with several institutions at that time. I want to ask you about what you've learned about the health of the classical music ecosystem in America right now. Like, how are your composers faring post-pandemic? And how has it been working with these institutions that are still struggling to get audiences back in the door?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very this is a very large topic, and I can't
Yes.
speak for my composers. They're not my composers. They're, individuals out there doing a variety of things, many of which I'm not aware of because, people are just living their lives. I will say that this project, one thing that it also made clear to me is that we are all much more connected to each other than we think we are. And what I mean by we is musicians, composers, presenting organizations, foundations maybe, and audiences. We're all much more interconnected than we think we are. We really need each other. And if one group from that equation is not doing well, then that will have ripple effects to everybody else. I was incredibly moved by presenters who wanted to support this project, in particular, the very small ones, like ones that have tiny budgets, for whom $5,000 is a substantial amount of money. But they thought it was important for them, for their communities, for the composers to support creation of new work. And I'm eternally grateful to them, to all of the presenters and the individuals who supported it. And in a way, it's kind of like we built a little world, over the course of 2020, 2021. All the composers and all the presenters and all the audiences that have come to listen to the music, we've built our own little community, our own little world. And I love that because we'll always have that.
If you'd like to read a longer version of this interview, just head to uncsa.edu/artrestart. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, won't you do us a favor and tell a friend about it? Your recommendation would mean the world to us. Also, be sure to subscribe or follow us so you can be sure to find out as soon as our next chat with an artist changemaker is out for you to listen to. Special thanks to Amy Colling Russell and Carolina Performing Arts, one of Johnny's partners on This Is America, and where he is currently curator in residence. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Kenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, thanks so much for listening.